Gina Gershon is perhaps best known to American audiences for her bold, fearless performances in films like Showgirls and Bound. She has spent more than 4 decades carving out a career in Hollywood on her own terms, building a reputation as someone who does not bend easily to pressure. Now, at 63, she is telling her story in full. Her new memoir, Alpha Pussy: How I Survived the Valley and Learned to Love My Boobs, has generated considerable attention not only for its candid title, but for the revelations inside it. Among the most striking is the account of a decision she made very early in her career, a decision that most young actors in her position would never have had the courage to make. She turned down a lead role in Friday the 13th, Part 2. But why would a young actress hungry for her first major break walk away from one of Hollywood's hottest franchises at the time? The answer, it turns out, has less to do with the horror genre itself and everything to do with what the role required of her. Friday the 13th Part 2 was released in 1981, the immediate follow-up to the original film that had become a massive box office success the year before. The sequel was highly anticipated, and landing a lead role in it would have been a significant career milestone for any young actress. Gershon was offered exactly that opportunity. By her own account, her initial reaction was excitement. She was eager to act in movies, eager to get her foot in the door, and this was a genuine opening. Then she read the script more carefully, and the excitement began to fade. The role required her character to be murdered in a scene that, in keeping with the conventions of the slasher genre at the time, involved her removing her top moments before her death. In her memoir, Gershon described the scene plainly. Her character was to be killed with a stake through the heart, with blood running down her exposed torso. She wrote that it struck her as exploitation in its most basic form, not a scene designed to reveal character, not a moment that served the story in any meaningful way, but a cheap device used to shock an audience at a young woman's expense. So the question becomes, what does a young actress in early 1980s Hollywood actually do when faced with that kind of choice? She goes home and talks to her father. That is exactly what Gershon did, and the conversation she describes is one of the most memorable passages in her memoir and in her recent interview with Fox News Digital. She was not looking for permission, she was looking, she said, for guidance, and she expected a protective response, perhaps even an outright refusal from a father who would draw the line for her. Instead, her father gave her something far more valuable than a simple yes or no. He told her it was her body, and that if she was comfortable with the decision, he was comfortable with it. He put the choice entirely in her hands. That response, she said, was transformative. What makes that conversation significant is not just what her father said, but what it taught her. Gershon has spoken at length about how that moment shaped her understanding of her own authority over her career and her body. She has said that she was fortunate to have a father who taught her to believe in her own decisions, who did not require her to rebel against family expectations to assert herself. The lesson was absorbed early, and it stayed with her. Once the choice was clearly hers to make, she made it. She did not want to do the scene. It felt silly to her. It felt exploitative. And so she walked away from the role entirely. Now, before assuming this was simply a young woman with rigid views on nudity, it is worth pausing to understand the full picture of what Gershon actually believes, because her position, then and now, is considerably more nuanced than a blanket rejection of explicit content. Gershon has been consistent and clear on this point throughout her career. She grew up watching European cinema, a body of work known for its frank and often unapologetic treatment of the human body. She has never objected to nudity as a concept. Her standard, which she has articulated in interviews and in her memoir, is one of artistic purpose. If a scene involving nudity genuinely reveals something true about a character, if it advances the story in a meaningful way, if it earns its place in the narrative, she is open to it. What she will not accept is nudity that exists purely for spectacle, for shock, or for the gratification of an audience at the expense of the character's dignity. By that standard, the Friday the 13th scene failed completely. And years later, she would face a far more prominent test of those same principles on the set of one of the most controversial films of the 1990s. How she handled that test says everything about how deeply that early lesson had taken root. That film was Showgirls, Paul Verhoeven's 1995 drama set in the world of Las Vegas entertainment. It is a film that generated enormous controversy upon its release, earned some of the most brutal reviews of that decade, and yet has since become a genuine cult classic, reconsidered and reappraised by generations of viewers who found in it layers of satire and social commentary that the original critics largely missed. Gershon played Crystal Connors, a seasoned headliner whose relationship with the film's protagonist forms the dramatic core of the story. The role was demanding, explicit, and required Gershon to navigate an environment where the pressure to push boundaries further was constant and came directly from the director himself. Verhoeven, by multiple accounts, was not shy about proposing new ideas on set, sometimes significant ones with little notice. On at least one occasion, he suggested a scene in which Gershon's character would expose herself in a dressing room sequence. Gershon's response was measured and direct. She did not refuse outright. Instead, she asked why. She wanted to understand what the scene would accomplish, what would it reveal about Crystal, how would it move the story forward. She made clear she was open to anything that served those purposes, but she was not going to do something simply because it was proposed. Verhoeven dropped the idea. The pattern she had established years earlier when she walked away from a horror franchise as a young unknown held firm even when she was on a major production working with an internationally respected director. That is not a trivial thing. Her memoir covers the full arc of these experiences, and it has been received with considerable interest since its publication. Gershon has made the rounds in interviews and podcast appearances, and in each conversation she returns to the same theme. The decisions that shaped her career were not made in boardrooms or by agents calculating risk and reward. They were made quietly, on her own, grounded in a sense of self that her father helped her build when she was still a young woman trying to figure out who she was and what she stood for. She has said that her father died too soon, that she only had 19 years with him, but that the lessons he left her were foundational. Trust yourself in making your own decisions. That was the core of it. Looking back at the Friday the 13th franchise itself, the films continued without her and went on to spawn a series that ran for years. The role she declined was filled by someone else. The movie came and went, and the industry moved on. But Gershon's career took a different shape entirely, one built on a series of choices made with intention rather than desperation. She became associated with roles that were complex, often provocative, but never gratuitous in the way she had refused to be from the very beginning. Showgirls, despite its rocky initial reception, is today frequently cited in serious film conversations. Gershon's performance in it is consistently highlighted as one of its most compelling elements. There is a broader context worth noting here. The early 1980s horror boom, of which Friday the 13th was a central part, has been examined critically in the years since for exactly the kind of content Gershon objected to. The pattern she identified as a young actress, women's bodies used as props in scenes of violence, has been written about extensively by film scholars and cultural critics. Her instinct at the time, before those critical frameworks were widely established, was based on nothing more than her own sense of what felt right and what felt wrong. That instinct proved to be sound. At 63, Gina Gershon is looking back without regret. She is looking back with the kind of clarity that comes from having lived a life consistent with your own values. Her memoir is frank, often funny, and entirely her own. It is the account of a woman who decided early what she would and would not do, held to that through decades of pressure and temptation, and emerged on the other side with a sense of self fully intact. The lesson at the center of it all is straightforward enough, but it is one that a great many people in a great many industries never quite manage to learn. Know what you stand for, trust the people who helped you find it, and do not trade that away for a role in a movie where the only thing your character has to offer is a moment of cheap spectacle before the credits roll.